Hi, I'm Dr. Arlen Myers. I'm President and CEO of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, and thanks for joining us for this SoPE Grand Rounds, where we're pleased to have Michael Conniff as our guest, who's going to be talking about storytelling for startups. So good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Arlen. How are you?
Excellent. So could you tell folks a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I am at heart and at the end of the day, I'm a writer. I've written all kinds of things from novels to short stories to novellas to scripts, not to mention journalism, blogging, content marketing, you name it, I've written it. But I've had a parallel career as a tech entrepreneur going back to 1980 when I was the first person ever hired by NBC in new media. So I literally go back to the dawn of time in this area. But I did a couple of startups that took up most of my career. I had a consulting firm. And about a year and a half ago, I was really writing full time, but I got contacted by an accelerator, then a family office about being an advisor. And so I pivoted my storytelling. I kept writing actually, so it wasn't a total pivot, but I pivoted my storytelling into startups and new media and helping companies get funded, helping companies get off the ground. And it's really been a great adventure because I've been able to take everything I know about storytelling and everything I've learned and use it in the service of founders and startups and entrepreneurs. And so I guess that's why I'm here today with storytelling for startups, because I think there are a lot of universal truths in storytelling, and I'm happy to share any and all of them.
Yeah, great. So let's start with the why. So why is it important that startups, let alone any individual, know how to tell a story?
Well, let me refer to a medical condition to try to answer that. So the tragedy when someone gets Alzheimer's or dementia is they lose their stories, they lose their history, they lose their ability to place themselves in space and time. And we all see that as a terrible tragedy. And that, I think, almost more than anything else to me, tells you the power of storytelling. That if we don't have our stories, what do we have? We're really just empty vessels at that point. So same thing for a company. A company is nothing more than a story. Elon Musk has said that Tesla is really just a story. And it's actually, I think, really important not only to see a company as a story, but to see a founder or founders as story and storytellers, because the founder is doing this for a reason. You said why. Why is the founder doing this company? A founder could do anything, right? It's a free country. Founder could be doing anything, but they choose to do a given company. And that's because it resonates with something in them. I like to call it authenticity. I like to say the authenticity of the founder can really resonate throughout the entire company, marketing, sales, of course, public relations and communications, but even fundraising. And I think without a story, and by the way, without the right story, you're going to be in real trouble, because story is how we connect with each other. And that includes connecting with your team and investors and your customers.
And there's a lot of applications, obviously, to telling the story in medicine, not the least of which is a doctor talking to a patient and the patient talking to the doctor, because at the end of the day, it's all about the patient telling you their story.
That's right. And you know, it's interesting, this morning in this morning's New York Times, there was a very laudatory story about ChatGPT and physicians, how ChatGPT was teaching physicians how to communicate empathy to their patients, particularly when there's bad news. And I found this was way too optimistic about what this is, what's going to happen with AI. But nonetheless, I think it speaks to how important it is to say the right thing at the right time. And you know, we talk about a physician's bedside manner. I guess there's kind of an entrepreneur's bedside manner. We're on grand rounds today, which I'm thrilled about. But there's kind of a bedside manner for entrepreneurs too, and you need a lot of different elements to make that work.
Yeah. That story, I don't want to go down the AI rabbit hole because God knows everyone has talked about it forever. But some of the criticism in that article was that, and I'll ask you this question: telling a story is one thing, and having an hour and 34 minutes or whatever a feature film length is another. Doctors don't have an hour and 34 minutes to tell the story, and neither do entrepreneurs. It's said in some instances they have a minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes at a pitch fest. And when you're in the office with a patient, you have 12, 15 minutes to kind of get the story. So there's another aspect to this, and that is, how do you tell the story in a limited period of time, depending on the audience that you're speaking to? So it's time constrained. And that was one of the arguments about this AI empathy thing. If doctors had all day long to talk to their patients, they would, and I think they would like to, but we don't. So what are your thoughts about, so we'll eventually get into this, because part of this is storytelling for startups when you have a minute to do it, or when you have 12 minutes to interview a patient.
It's so interesting, because what did Mark Twain say? He said, when he wrote somebody a long letter, he said, "I'm sorry this is so long, but I didn't have time to make it short." Right. So there's a couple of really simple rules here, or tips or hints. So cut to the chase. You used a film analogy, cut to the chase, right? In newspaper talk, in newspaper speak, we call that the lead, right? And the lead is simply, what is the most important thing? Start with that. I think that's always a good place to start. And here's the one mistake everyone makes, even me, and maybe especially me, is that they try to tell their story as an entrepreneur chronologically. They say, I was at Starbucks and I had this idea, or I had this page, I had this idea. Now that's part of the story and it belongs in the story. But what you really want to do is start with the thing that's going to get people locked in on what you're saying. Not the chronological 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, not the chronological story. Start with the main thing, start with the biggest thing, and then build out from there. But I think I can't tell you how many times entrepreneurs do that chronological thing. And the other thing is to avoid, another tip is avoid clearing your throat. Here's what I mean by this. A lot of people start to tell their story as a founder, and they go through, basically they're just warming up. They're just talking, they're just like, well, when I was thinking about this or doing that, they're not like getting to the point. And no matter how much time you have, the more success, and this goes for doctors too, right? At the bedside, the more succinct you can be, kind of the better. If you can get to the point, why would you start anywhere else, right? So I think those things, don't do it chronologically, don't clear your throat, get right to it from the first sentence. That would be my advice.
Okay. So some other folks are joining us, and I just want to mention that if you have a question, just ask it, raise your hand or put it in the chat or something, because we really want to make this interactive, informative, answer your questions. So that's the why. So let's talk about, before we get to the how, let's talk about the what. So what are the elements of a good story? So when you watch a movie or read a book or any story, I can remember when I was in, I think it was elementary school even, or maybe in high school, my high school teacher, English teacher, which incidentally did not include writing, which I think was a big mistake. But anyway, the point is, she said, fundamentally, if you look at every story in the world, it's basically 3 stories. It's man against man, man against nature, man against himself or herself. So in some way, shape, or form, I mean, would you agree with that? And what are the elements of a good story?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it said that, excuse me, my dogs are barking. I've heard it said that there are only 7 stories. That's what you typically hear, you know, and one of them, for example, is, you know, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. You know, that's like, that's one story. I think that the what speaks to looking at it from an entrepreneur's standpoint, as opposed to a novelist. So a novelist, the answer is it's always, you know, it's going to be either character or plot. So the genre of books like detective stories are a great example. They are driven by plot. There is character, of course, sometimes very importantly, but basically it's either going to be character development or plot development. That's sort of in a typical story. Now, how does this apply to storytelling for startups in particular? I've come to believe that the what, I see the why as kind of the beginning and the what is the middle. And I'll get to the end before we get to the end of our talk here today. But so the why is the beginning, the what is the middle. And here's what I mean by that. You obviously have to answer, what are you doing? You've sort of given a reason why you're doing it. So what exactly is it? And here's the key, what is different about it and what is unique about it? Because when you, like you, Arlen, like me, people in the startup world, we hear pitches all day long, all day long. And what we're really listening for, at least what I'm listening for, is like, is it different? Is it unique? Has anybody done this before? And why haven't they done it before? And is this a real opportunity if it's new? It doesn't have to be new, but it's much more interesting and usually better if it is. But I mean something else very specific to startups when I say what. So beginning, middle, end. So the what in the middle is traction. What I'm always listening for is, okay, you need the great idea, I think. I think it really helps if it's a great idea. But what I'm always looking for is, what kind of traction do you have? What I mean by that is pretty specific. In the medical realm, I would say it's, do you have a patent on something? Do you have a new drug? Do you have test results? Have you been in a clinical trial? Do you have approvals from the FDA or whoever else might need to approve it? How many customers do you have? Have customers bought it? Now, are they paying for it? Is it growing? Do you have more customers now than you had 6 months ago? So this is the what to me, certainly of a pitch. And we're not just talking about pitches, but the middle to me is after you establish, you know, what you're doing and explaining in the most clear terms what it is that this product or service does. I think if you can go right into traction, look at how far along we've come. Look at how far we've come. And I think too many, you know, one thing I've decided like is absolutely worthless. Others would disagree. But to me, it's like total addressable market, or TAM. It doesn't tell you much. It's always huge, right? People are always saying, oh, the TAM for this is, you know, $100 billion. And it's just not meaningful to me because it doesn't speak to traction, authenticity, these things, these drivers that I'm looking for. So to me, the what, and I've really begun to feel this way very strongly over the course of the last year and a half. It's the traction, because what does the traction say? The traction literally says people are not only going to buy this, but they're already buying it, or you have something nobody else has that they're very much destined to buy. So I would put my what like that. That would be my what.
Yeah. And I mean, at these days, given the economic environment and the funding environment, the real question is your idea fundable? And when people look at that answer, there's a whole list of criteria. You've mentioned several. And actually, there is, speaking of AI, there is a platform which I recently test drove. A friend of mine is developing it, called Haystacks. And Haystacks, and I think it's haystacks like x.com. And basically, it's a way for potential investors, whether they be angels or family offices or whatever, to use evidence-based criteria that predicts the likelihood of funding of a startup. It's pretty interesting. So when you look at the characteristics of, some of the things that you've mentioned, I think there's like 15 or 16
Mhm.
criteria, and they're graded like 1 to 4. And there's like a dashboard and a dial that says, yeah, you're going to get funded. No, you're not. But because they have a database of companies that were in their accelerator, and then they looked at them a couple of years later and say, well, what happened to it? Did they get funded? So they were able to do some predictive analytics using so-called artificial intelligence, basically machine learning, to identify it. So I think we're going to see more and more. And actually, there have been some articles about, hedge funds and people using these models to determine what's going to happen to something. Okay, so we've talked about the why. We talked about.
Could I just make a comment about that, because I've been thinking a lot about that, and I've been hearing a lot of presentations.
Yeah.
So platforms want to make companies and founders quantifiable,
Right.
and you can quantify certain things, but I never, it's funny you said, is it fundable? That is never a question I ask myself. And maybe I should. I'm not saying do it my way, but basically, what I have found is I gravitate toward inventors that are good people, that are really smart, that have some traction and have a great idea. Okay, so I look at it as and think to myself, is that I think they're mostly everything is fundable if you have how is a great idea not fundable? There are some, but if you do it properly, probably most great ideas are fundable. Same thing with founders. One other thing, I have found that that the founders I gravitate toward have a technical capability. In other words, it's like the CEO with the CTO built in. They have a technical capability that means that they could do almost any job in the company. Sort of they're general managers, but with a CTO mindset, right? So those are the things that I look for. But I know there are a lot of platforms, trying to figure this out. But I think that the trouble is, once you start to quantify it, number one, if something's on a platform, everybody else is going to be able to see it, right? There's going to be no secrets about it. It's on a platform. You can go find it, right? Whereas if you have your own criteria, you can find companies nobody else is looking at. So those are some of the things I think about in the what.
Right. I would put a somewhat different spin on it, and that is that in sick care, and this is a problem when non-health professionals like techies start or launch sick care companies. Because the problem is, to your point, yeah, they have all this technical ability and data, and they know all this in and out, but they really don't have a good handle, in most cases, not all. They really don't have a good handle on the sick care system and workflow. So they don't understand how doctors and other health professionals actually take care of patients and the pain points that are involved in taking care of those patients. So, sick care ain't Uber, or it's not Zappos. So you might have made $1 billion selling shoes to direct to consumer on a website. And people say, well, gee, that wasn't so hard. Maybe I can just fix sick care and do the same thing. No, you can't. It's a different animal. So I would say that the criteria generally, different ways to skin the cat, have to do with, is your idea technically feasible? I mean, you could say, you know what? I've invented a quantum computer that could make every password obsolete. And I'm going to sell this. Well, the fact of the matter is, quantum computers are just like, they're making them, but there's really no practical use for them yet. Eventually there might be. Well, there will be, but who knows how long that's going to take. So is what you are proposing feasible? In other words, can you actually do it? Can you actually pull it off? The second is, to your point of traction, is your idea commercially attractive? And what evidence that you have that people actually are going to buy this or have bought it? In other words, that would be the commercial feasibility or validity. So you have technical validity, you have commercial validity, evidence-based, not a wild ass guess, not a song and a prayer, not, well, I think so. What is the evidence? And third is, and this is a point which is frequently not done, which is clinical validity. Does the thing do actually what you say it is going to do for patients? Is it going to make them better? Is it going to actually make the diagnosis? Is it actually going to do whatever? And that is a problem because there's something like 365 or more thousand health apps on iPhones and Droid, and a handful of them are clinically validated that actually, as a result of some trial or clinical, let alone a randomized controlled trial, I'm just saying, does it work? So people are saying, a lot of this stuff is snake oil, and we could get down into this week, into this rabbit hole. I don't want to make this too burdensome, but the point is, a lot of people, a lot of founders, don't want to clinically validate it for two reasons. One, it's very expensive. And two, they might not like the answer. So it's like a drug trial. I mean, you know as well as I do, billions and billions of dollars get poured into drug discovery and development. If you have a failed phase 1 or a phase 2 trial, game over. I mean, the stock plunges, they pull the plug, and that's the end of it. So it's the sort of same thing with digital health, with artificial intelligence, with remote sensing, with patient report. I mean, the whole deal. So that's a big problem. And we could spend a whole nother show, and maybe we will, on why is it such a big problem and how do you overcome it? But that's an issue. So just to summarize, when you're telling the story, so let's get back to what we're talking about. When you're telling a story, my thought is, and I tend to think in threes. So there's the hook, the body, and the close in the story. The lead, the stuff in the middle, and the ask. If you're looking for money, or you're looking for a job or whatever, there's an ask at the end. There's a call to action. And secondly, there are three basic categories in the story. One, is this technically valid? Two, is this commercially valid? Three, is this clinically valid? Does it work? So those are the basic elements. So having moved then from the why to the what, now we get into the how. So you already mentioned a couple of things that you should do. So, and again, this will depend on who are you telling the story to and for what purpose. So let's just take the example of a startup, and you're a startup founder, and you're telling your story to anybody that'll listen, and whether it's a customer or a partner or a stakeholder or an investor. So what are some other tips you can tell us about how to tell the story?
It's kind of a tough one. By the way, I agree with everything you said. I thought you broke that down really well. The how is, well, let me do this in the form of something that's right on my plate right this minute. And I'll try to answer your question in that context. So I was contacted by someone who has a patent on a drug and a methodology to treat PTSD. Okay, they said, okay, it's a psychiatrist, an MD. He actually did a clinical trial decades ago that had very positive results for through a number of circumstances. Nobody followed up on it. So we have this treatment that has a history of working, at least at one point. And we have a problem. We have one of the greatest pain points in the United States of America and around the world, in every country is post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So here, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, the pain point is obvious and real. The total addressable market for that, Arlen, is unlimited. Everybody, and nothing's been done to solve it. There are treatments, but they're kind of very iffy and they don't all work. So the how of this to me is, and I don't think like a doctor, obviously, but the how of this is like, okay, let's get a trial going. We need a new trial. It's been 30 years. Let's get a trial going in a VA hospital. And let's see if it works, right? So medicine in a way is different than some of the, everything else really, because as you were saying, if it doesn't work, it's game over, right? If you rip it up, company's dead, forget it. But what if it does work? So to me, it's like the key thing in the how is like, you have to, I'm not sure I can answer it adequately, to be honest with you, in medicine. And, in non-medicine areas, you would say, how is like how you get it into the marketplace. It's sort of the go to market. But medicine has all this stuff that has to happen up front. But this is a real world example. How would you do that? I'd be curious to hear your answer to that. Okay, we got something, a drug, there's some evidence it works. It's a gigantic, it's a blockbuster if it does work, I think, right? So I know enough to know, like, get it in a trial, probably in a VA hospital, and make sure it works. Now, how would you answer that one, Arlen?
So the way I would answer that is, first of all, that when it's to your point, the person that you are talking to is judging you based on your verbal and nonverbal communication. So how you come across, I don't care what the words coming out of your mouth, but how you come across says a lot about whether I'm going to listen, let alone write a check for $10 million. So the nonverbal, and I don't need to tell anybody in this audience, is more important. Like what, 85% of the information is nonverbal. So like the rest is sort of like fluff, but you have to sort of engage and give a person a reason to listen. So some tips that I've tried and seem to work are, first of all, when you're pitching your idea or telling the story of the startup, have the right spokesperson. I'm sorry, but there are a lot of people who are, and through no fault of their own. I mean, for example, if someone has a very heavy accent, it could be from New Jersey, let alone Syria, I mean, they have whatever, you forget about it. It's so have someone that has very good communication skills.
Shout out to New Jersey there in the Sopranos.
Yeah, Arlen, right. I'm from New Jersey. I don't sound like that.
With exception, Bill. Right. So, well, I'm from Philly, so yeah, I guess so. The pot calling a kettle black. So it's the same thing. So pick the right person. That is articulate and can do this. And second, so another tip is practice, practice, practice. So you just don't get a script and go on the set and shoot the shot. I mean, you rehearse. So and you do it like a million times until the director says, okay, that's a cut or a wrap or whatever. So you have to practice. And my suggestion these days, that's pretty simple with technology. You get a friend with an iPhone and you pitch and you take the video and you look at it and you say, and then you give it to people and you say, what do you think? And they say, well, you sort of weren't looking at the camera and the lighting was wrong and you were clearing your throat and saying and to your point. So practice and have a script. Now, when you pitch this thing, you don't read the script. The point, just like, I guess, on a movie set, these folks don't read the script, they memorize it and it comes naturally. So you repeat it over and over and over. So it's not too rigid, but it's not your first rodeo. So you've done this before. You've told the story before over and over and over, and you've refined it so that you know what to say.
Can I add one point to that?
Yeah.
I'm gonna push back ever so slightly with this. If you do all of those things incredibly well, you practice, you do everything, Arlen, you're suggesting, but you don't have your story straight, it's like just drilling yourself deeper into a bottomless pit, because you're not, no matter how good a communicator you are, you could get George Clooney, okay? No matter how good a communicator you are, if you don't have the story straight, none of that's going to matter, because it'll be like practicing the wrong thing. It's like being a basketball player and you're practicing a bad technique. You'll just get worse, right? So the upfront work of like really knowing what you have, to me, is so important. And and to me, it's really hard. It's really hard to make things simple, but that's the goal.
So I agree with you. I'm obviously, I mean, you gotta tell a story that people are going to believe and get it straight. And this applies to politicians. It applies to anybody who's trying to sell something or tell something. And the best example is, and this is actually pretty hard, and I think you and I have had experience with this, and that is articulating the value proposition. So to put it in business speak, now, what does that mean? It means that the value proposition is the a statement of what you are promising to the customer. Like, what are you saying that says, if you buy my stuff or you use me, here's what I promise I'm going to do, or I'm going to sell, or you're going to get, or whatever. And when we go through, and Michael and I have participated and do participate in various accelerators and innovation groups and all that, when I work people through this process or teach it, we start with an exercise that is designed to, and the challenge, and I would challenge the people listening to, the first step is, who's the customer? So what are you trying to accomplish? Who is this person? Could be an investor, could be a hospital that you want to buy your digital health product, whatever. There's all kinds of stakeholders. Or it could be a patient. Like, I'm trying to encourage you to do what I think is in your best interest, or more cynically, I want you to pick me to do your operation, like in cosmetic surgery or cosmetic dentistry, because you got a million choices and you've already been to 7 other doctors and you're vetting me against all the other doctors.
And you're still ugly. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
Right. You got a second opinion? Yeah, you're ugly. So the point is, so pick the customer. All right. Now, for that customer, what is the value proposition to that customer? And the value proposition, there's various ways to state that. And there's several templates or models that you can use. And probably the one that's cited the most frequently is the one in George Moore with Crossing the Chasm. And it basically is about who is the customer, and there's a template. We can give you more information about it. But when I challenge startup groups to articulate the value proposition in no more than 15 words, that is hard. And you go in 5th grade English so that your grandmother can understand whatever the hell you're trying to sell. Not jargon, not techno speak, not all the science and all that. Just tell me in plain English. And Michael, maybe you can upgrade me, but my understanding is the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times is written for 12th grade at a 12th grade English reading level. Now,
well, that puts it 1 grade above ChatGPT.
Which, well, it used to be, I thought it was a 5th grade English level, but I think they upped the ante. So maybe more, better educated people are subscribing. But anyway, the point is, it has to be in plain English that an average person can understand in very few words. And to your point of the Mark Twain quote, the fewer words, the better. If I had more time, I would have made this shorter. This could take you 6 months of iteration to get the story in as few words as possible. And
could I jump in? Just forgive me for interrupting, but I wanted to say, like, I have this real world example of the PTSD. So the value proposition there is so simple, right? To end the suffering of veterans. Okay, that's what it is. To end the lifetime suffering of veterans so they can have a normal life. And in thinking, I wanted to add to this just the importance of how you name things and how you name companies and things like that, and also product names. So I'm referring to this project, and it's a working name, but I'm referring to it as Peace at Last. And by doing that, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to the outcome and the benefit, right? Peace at last.
Right.
What a great thing that would be, wouldn't it, for our veterans? Like, with all the talk, all the blather about, thank you for your service,
Right.
which most veterans hate to hear,
Right.
to actually do something that changed their lives and ended the suffering. And by the way, because you've treated them, I'm sure, but there are veterans of the Vietnam War who have had PTSD for 50, 60, almost 70 years now. So this would be monumental, but it's pretty obvious, right? And sometimes what I would say is as you're doing this as a doctor, as a medical entrepreneur, think in terms of the benefit, think in terms of the outcome. That will really help you to see why you're doing it and also how you do it.
Right. So that gets to two other points when you're telling your story. One, it's about the benefits, stupid. It's not about the features. I don't care how many mega whatevers your device can produce or how many gadgets are inside of it. I could care less about how it works. I just want to know, what good is it going to do? So focus on the benefits, not on the features. Likewise, focus on the problem, not the solution. You want to own the problem, not the solution, because PTSD has a lot of solutions. It's not just one solution. It's a part of a multiple approach to PTSD, whether it's transmagnetic stimulation or a gadget you put in your ear or copper bracelets you wear around your wrist. I don't know which one works and which one doesn't, but it's too complicated a disease to have one thing, at least at this point. Maybe there's a drug that'll make it go away. But the point is, focus on the problem, on the problem, and you want to sell a solution, not a product. So you're going to be talking about the problem, which is, and when you start the pitch or tell the story, the hook, which is the lead of the story. I mean, every journalist, I think, at least when the story starts out with a person in Ukraine who is trying to recover their child that was stolen by the Russians. That's the lead. And then it drills down into the who, what, why, where, when of all this other business. But you really want to make it personal, and you want to hook it to a person with a problem. So in the case of PTSD, you may have a 30-second video. You don't say anything. You get introduced. Here's Arlen. He's going to pitch his drug for PTSD. Thank you for having me. And you stop talking and you show a 30-second video of a person who is a Vietnam vet who has suffered his or her entire life with PTSD. And you leave them with an emotional impact, because people buy emotionally and justify rationally. This is about talking to the heart, not the head.
That's right.
So if you talk about all this stuff, it's just who cares? I need an emotional hook. Every story, every movie, every novel, every piece of music has an emotional hook. So that's really, I think, another very important and other points. I want to interrupt Art because we've been doing all the talking. Audrey or Lawrence or anybody else on this, does anybody have a question or want to share a story, what they did or how they told the story, what happened, tell us what happened when you did it, that kind of thing. Audrey, do you want to say anything?
I'm sorry, I was interrupted here, but I just find this whole series fascinating with the storytelling. I was wondering, can you go into specifics in regards to your personal experience as the what's worked great for you and what has not?
Yeah, are you talking to me or Michael or both?
Both, both.
Okay, so Michael, you want to give us your worst storytelling experience?
Well, I can tell you the mistake I've made over and over. It's the mistake we all make is trying to tell more than one story. So the example I would give you is my company, Interactive Sports, was very early to the party in analytics and fan database marketing and all kinds of things. And then actually in the 1990s, nobody knew what we were talking about. And we kind of evolved into like a mini ESPN. I call this like a flea on the back of a flea on the back of a flea on the back of ESPN. So we were tiny, but we were trying to do so many things. And I had the opportunity to go to see Jake Burton, who invented snowboarding, one of the people who invented snowboarding, and Burton Snowboards. He lived in the same town I did in Vermont. And I went to see him, and I told him what I was doing. And he said, you know, people come in here every day into his office, and his office had no desk. It was just couches. So it was kind of cool. And he said, they tell me, you know, I should do this, I should do that, I should go into street sports, I should go into skateboard. And all I do all day long is say no. My job is to say no all day long. And I tell them we're a snowboarding company. That's all we are. Okay. And so in my case with sports, here's what I believe to be true of my own career. Had Interactive Sports, had my partner and I chosen one of the 18 things we were trying to do, we would have been successful. I'm convinced of that. And we were almost successful anyway. But if we had just picked one, and it really wouldn't have mattered which one. For example, we had a news service that went to over 3 million people in the early days of the internet, a sports news service. So we could have done that. There were a number of things. So, so what happens when you're trying to tell more than one story, it means you really have no story. Because the minute somebody's getting excited about the first story, you pull out this other one. Oh, and you know, we're going to do this too, you know? So I would say that the biggest, a very common mistake is to try to have more than one story. Two stories is like having no story. So I would say that's been my biggest lesson.
Yeah, and that happens when you get traction as a company. I call that the distraction of traction. Like you start
That's
out,
good.
you just start out with one thing, and then pretty soon, how about if we do this? How about if we do that? How about if we try? How about if we sell? You know, just, I think, you know, think big, start small, stay small as long as you can. Now, ultimately, like Amazon, hey, I think selling books on the internet would be a good idea. Well, look at them now. I mean, it's a conglomerate. So, but eventually, you know, they take on these new product lines. And the same thing actually happens with doctors. You know, I'm a specialist in whatever, and then the new shiny new object happens, and well, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to add that to my practice, or I'm going to use this technology that has nothing to do with my specialty. And there's a million examples of that. So that's a good, my observation is, and this speaks to authenticity. I tell people, make it personal, but don't take it personally. So what that means is that you're trying to communicate to somebody, why in the God's name are you doing this? I mean, what tripped your trigger, particularly in sick care? That is, you know, why in the world would you want to try to get into this industry that is horribly complicated, that is fraught with landmines? I mean, there's a million other things you could do to make your life easier than trying to handle sick care. But people do it for a lot of legitimate reasons, trying to make a difference. It's a big problem. I want to, you know, all that stuff. And I'll give you an example, and it's really sort of a relatively simple. So the point is, tell your story that's authentic. There's problems with authenticity because people may not like who you are authentically, and then you got to get all the pushback. or they really like it. I mean, there are all kinds of political examples lately. So the point is, you want to be sort of authentic, but not too authentic. That's within your comfort zone. I mean, you don't want to tell the world about all your secrets, you know, all the skeleton. Maybe you do. I don't know. It's up to you if you want to tell skeletons in your closet. But so that's up to you.
Arlen, if I could just add something to that, an entrepreneur founder I was with last week in New York City was telling me what he wanted to do, and he was saying that, you know, there were VCs who didn't like what he wanted to do, and what he wanted to do was really smart, I thought, and a great idea. And I said, well, those are the wrong VCs for you. You know, so the authenticity, like, you should never squander your authenticity. I mean, that's the gold, right? Because that people are they're going to sense that. They're going to sense you're not being totally real. So be totally real. Don't tell them all your secrets, like Arlen said. Don't, you know, that happens a lot too. Like I had an entrepreneur last week. He was actually in Dubai, and it's an amazing story. And one day this story will be told. But he was pitching a company that was very interesting, but he went into this whole thing about how he had been homeless with his wife in London after he had left, after his first company didn't work. And I was like, you know what? Hold that thought. Because that will be an unbelievably good story when you're successful. But wait until you're successful, right? So I agree with you, Arlen. You can't bear all.
Right.
But I think yeah.
Well, and there's a difference between a creation story and a personal story. So of your company. So I mean, people are always interested in, well, how did you do this? Like, how did you start the company? And I could tell you chapter and verse about SoPE and a lot of other things that I did that failed. But people are very interested in knowing, well, how did you do this? How did this start? Like, it's like a novel, you know, you're like, gee, that's and it's a story. Like, there's the protagonist, and there are all the people that don't want it to happen, and you have to go through all these landmines, and you need, you know, mentors and people to guide you through the gates of Hades and all that business. So you put it in that format, and people are very interested in that. To answer Audrey's question, what I've noticed is, and what I think is kind of interesting is to this authenticity point. So when you create your LinkedIn profile, it's a simple example. And if you haven't recently redone your LinkedIn profile, you should. But in the LinkedIn profile section, there's an about section. So, you know, you got your picture and you got the headline and all the other stuff. The most important part of the LinkedIn profile is the about section. That is the section where you tell your story. Now, most people, the story is, like, to Michael's point, I was born in Philadelphia, and I mean, it's a chronological, all the boring stuff. Instead of talking about you as a person, some kind of interest, it's always good to have humor and maybe a little bit of cynicism, but you really want to communicate a unique point of view, which is an important element of storytelling. I mean, everybody's got a different point of view and a voice, particularly op-ed people. And I mean, you know how they're going to talk about stuff. And so your favorite op-ed person is your favorite because you like about how they talk about stuff. So anyway, and some of this people on the call that I'm pretty friendly with, you know, they kid me about it, but just for grins, I was thinking about this idea and I said, well, I don't think I'm personal enough on my LinkedIn profile or authentic enough. So I put on the headline, you know, I put what I do and that's it. And oh, by the way, the about section, if you're going to write about anything about your job, people are not interested in the inputs. They're interested in the outputs, the results. So you worked for ESPN for 35 years, period, versus I grew the revenue and the market share of ESPN from 5% to 80% in 17 years, which is a $6 billion whatever. They want to know, what did you accomplish? Particularly on LinkedIn, if you're being considered to be hired, or you're looking for a side gig, or you're looking for something else to do. So it's about results. It is not about inputs. I don't care how long you worked there. What'd you accomplish? That having been said, so I thought, I thought I would put something on there. It was kind of cheeky, kind of fun. So I put on my LinkedIn profile, terrible golfer, lousy cook. If you look at my LinkedIn profile, this is what you'll see. Number one, in the description of me, I mentioned I started X number of companies and most of them failed. I also put in my LinkedIn profile, I'm a lousy golfer, which I am. I'm a terrible cook, just ask my wife. And I'm just pushing a rock up the hill until things change. So, and that's on my profile. I can't tell you how many people I have met that I've never met personally. I just recently went to a meeting where we had a face-to-face meeting. It was the first one in a long time. And the people that came up to me, they said, "Oh, you're the lousy golfer." So it's really funny what, we've all had a lifetime of accomplishments and education and triumphs. The things that people remember are really, those are the kinds of hooks that you need to communicate to people. A, because it makes you more personable. B, it makes you a little bit more authentic. And C, nobody's perfect. And everybody has this imagined conception of quote, successful people. When in fact, a lot of those people are just wealthy. They're not happy.
And
They may
Arlen,
be-
I remember about your profile. I know that you went to Harvard. I know you're a doctor, and I know you're a lousy golfer. That's the three things I remember. But I wanted to, by the same token, in my profile, at the end of my profile, I've written down player of drums. So I started playing drums when I was 68, and I'm terrible at it. But I can't tell you how many drummers on Zoom calls have said, I'm a drummer, I'm a guitarist, but it's like dozens of drummers, right?
Right.
And the drummers are actually right over my shoulder. You can actually see them usually when I'm talking. So I want to add one thing to the LinkedIn stuff, which is that it is 100% okay to be aspirational, particularly when you're younger. I had a founder of a great company called True Nation. I met him very randomly on LinkedIn. He said, I'm trying to end online abuse. I wrote back and I said, that's really interesting. That's really all I said. And I've been working with that guy for 1.5 years now. And guess what? He's figured out a way to end online abuse. So you can be aspirational. You can be aspirational. It's okay to say, I am trying to do this, or I would love to do this, or I would, particularly earlier in your career, it's okay to be aspirational. It's actually a good thing, because then it sort of makes people want to help you. Okay, they're being honest, it's authentic, and so on.
Yeah.
Before this is Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Hey, before we end, I wanted to share a resource that might be useful. And I'm wondering if Michael or Arlen, if you've heard of this, it's a book called Building a Story Brand.
Yeah.
I'm not, no.
Yes. So thanks for bringing that up. So story branding is like a hot topic. And I think, Michael, you had mentioned this to me in a conversation. So what is the difference between storytelling and story branding?
My favorite subject. I haven't ever found anyone.
We have 5 minutes. So
I can do this in a paragraph.
Yeah, sell it in 17 words. Right.
Yeah. They're completely different. Story is internal. It comes from the inside and works its way out. Branding is external. It's a manifestation of story, in my opinion. Therefore, story should not only precede brand, it should always supersede brand. And if you don't believe me, go see the movie Air about Nike and Phil Knight, and you will see it in action there. It's like your personal story is not your brand. Now, so for 1.5 years, I've been telling people, like, I I'm not talking about branding, and they come back and say, oh, you're talking about branding. And I haven't read this book, so I don't want to make any comment on that. I'm sure there are a lot of great ideas in there, but I think it might be a mistake to think that story and brand are the same thing. Very different.
Okay.
Yeah, I would recommend that. And if you just want the cliff notes, there are actually several YouTubes, and you get the synopsis and the whole deal. It actually, it's a good idea. And I mean, I'm not the branding expert, obviously, but that's, so Paul, do you have any comments you want to make or questions you want to ask?
No, thanks, Arlen. Yeah, no, it's been, I think, great to hear the two of you talk about building the story. I'm very new. I've just started an idea for a medical app company that helps teams communicate easier after clinical events using debriefing. And I've got a lot of experience with that in my own personal story, but I'm trying to figure out how to communicate that best and get people excited about it. So,
right. The final point, we're going to have to leave this in about 2 or 3 minutes, but the final point I would make is, regardless of where you're going with this, it's very important for you to begin to develop your personal brand. Now, we can get into this business of what is a brand and all that, but you really want to create credibility before you have to sell it. So that means, the old rhetoric device that dates back to the Greeks, ethos, pathos, and logos. So what that means is ethos is I'm one of you. I'm in the crowd. I'm in the tribe. I'm a doctor. You're a doctor. I understand all this. We're all facing the same thing. I get it. I get the secret handshake. And that happens a lot throughout the world and culture, including the United States, and particularly in the startup world. Why is it that everybody gets money from Silicon Valley when they have a lousy idea? Because they're part of the tribe. So, and they understand and have connections and all that. So there's the ethos part. Then there's the pathos part. I feel your pain, kind of the Bill Clinton thing. Like, I get it. I've been there. I understand what you've been through. I started 6 companies and most of them failed. I'm telling you all the stuff that I learned, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's the ethos part. I'm in the tribe. Pathos part. I feel your pain. Then there's the logos part, which is the logic of the argument, which, as we have been saying, is the least important part of the story. So if I were to end this with a final note, it would be that. Think in terms of speak to the heart, ethos, pathos, and sort of minor in logos. Don't get into the weeds. Don't use a lot of jargon. Create the emotional hook. And then once you have the fish on the line, then that's a whole nother story, reeling them in. But you just got to keep throwing the hooks in the water. I don't know whether any of you are fly fishermen, but I live in Colorado, so every now and then I'm terrible at that too. But I try it, and but I learned a lot of stuff. So unfortunately, we're going to have to end this. I think it was a lot of fun talking about this. I appreciate, Michael, thanks a lot for your insights and
thank you. It was always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, Arlen. Thank you so much for inviting.
So if you're interested in learning more about the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, remember, you have to have the call to action when you're telling the story. So here's the call to action. So if you're interested in joining the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs, we're at www.soapnet.org, and we'll have more of these grand rounds talking about various subjects of interest. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.